Hello again. I dare say that many viewers will have been reading about the inquiry into the deaths of three people in a stabbing spree in Nottingham 3 years ago, carried out by a black schizophrenic called Valdo Calocane. These deaths were inevitable and a direct consequence of a mad policy which I described in detail a year and a half before they took place. The headline to an article in yesterday's Guardian, to which I give a link in the description to this video, reads, "Nottingham killer was not sectioned because of his race." We learn that when he showed signs of psychosis and became violent, it was decided not to detain him under the Mental Health Act because, and I quote, "a team of mental health professionals considered research evidence that examined the overrepresentation of young black men in detention. There was a determination to keep freeing Calocane, no matter how dangerous he grew, no matter how often he was violent or had psychotic episodes, simply because nobody wanted too many black people being sectioned. It made the figures look bad." In June 2023, he went on to kill three people. 18 months earlier than that, on November the 7th, 2021, I published a video here on YouTube in which I gave a link to a book which I had written called The Equalitarian Dogma. Because I discussed race in this book, it was perhaps inevitable that the book should be described as racist. Hope Not Hate denounced it, of course, and me. If you click on the link I give in the description to this video, you will see the video I released in November 2021, and in the description to that video, there's a link to the book. Everything in it is, it's got all the sources that I used. It's properly referenced, so anyone that cares to read it can follow up on the sources and the reference which I give. On page 374 of that book, I say the following. In January 2021, it was announced in Britain that the Mental Health Act 1983 was to be changed, partly because of the disproportionate number of black people affected by it. Health and Social Care Secretary Matt Hancock said that the proposed changes outlined in the Reforming the Mental Health Act white paper would give people more autonomy over their care and will tackle disparities for all who access services, in particular for people from minority ethnic backgrounds. The reference to people from minority ethnic backgrounds was to do with black people. People of black Caribbean heritage in the United Kingdom are 9 times as likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia as white people. Those of African origin, black African origin, are 6 times as likely to receive such a diagnosis. Britain's Mental Health Act makes provision for people to be detained compulsorily in a psychiatric hospital if they are a danger to themselves or others. This is commonly known as being sectioned, alluding to the relevant section of the Act under which the action is taken. It had long been noticed that black people were more likely to be sectioned than white people. They are 4 times as likely to be sectioned and 10 times more likely to be the subject of a community treatment order, whereby they live outside a hospital but are still subject to compulsory treatment. This same phenomenon, by the way, has also been observed in the United States. When the British Health Secretary said publicly that he wished to tackle disparities for all who access services, in particular for people from ethnic minority backgrounds, he was hinting broadly that he wanted to see an end to such disparities. Ideally, black people and those of South Asian origin would be detained against their will in psychiatric hospitals at precisely the same rate as white people. This would be a kind of racial balancing, and this is what was happening when Valdo Calocane was being assessed in Nottingham. If 5% of a city's population are black, then no more than 5% of them should end up being sectioned, and not the 20% which is currently the case. The consequence of adhering to an ideological desire to reform mental health, rather than one driven by science, is likely to be unfortunate. Almost without a doubt, some people will die needlessly. And bearing in mind that I wrote this a year and a half, well, it was published a year and a half before Valdo Calocane carried out those killings, but I wrote it before that. Here is what I said. Once psychiatrists and nurses are made aware that there is a drive to reduce the number of black people being detained under the Mental Health Act, they will become reluctant to section any black people. No health authority wishes to be thought of as institutionally racist, and the word will go out to avoid, where humanly possible, increasing the number of black people being held in hospitals or treated compulsorily in the community. Murders committed by those suffering from psychosis are mercifully rare, but when they are committed, it is often by those with paranoid schizophrenia. If, for political and ideological purposes, there is pressure not to detain this person or that because he or she belongs to some group, especially a group with increased propensity to schizophrenia, then it is a racing certainty that at least one such person released against the wishes of a psychiatrist, but to fulfill some quota, will go off and kill somebody. It is a recipe for disaster. It is what happens when ideology dictates policy rather than science. This is, of course, precisely what happened in the case of Valdo Calocane, and the course of events followed exactly the scenario which I describe in my book. The reports of the inquiry into the case leave no doubt at all this is being explicitly discussed. This is what happened. No wonder that so many people were ready to start describing all this as racist, because I gave a plain and unvarnished account of what was happening in the field of mental health in Britain and the way in which it would lead inevitably to murders of the kind which we saw in Nottingham. As I said, this is what happened when ideology triumphs over science. There will be more unnecessary deaths from the same cause, of course. What I find truly baffling is that if I, who am most definitely not an expert in this field, could see clearly what was going on 4 or 5 years ago, why did nobody else? How is it possible that I was able to describe what is now being admitted at the inquiry into the Nottingham stabbings? For want of any other explanation, I must assume that it is because I am not afraid to speak and write about the ideology of race in a way that others seem to be terrified of doing. In other words, I talk about things that nobody wants to talk about.